believe at the December hearing. We tabled it, and then we just haven't had a meeting subsequently to go through it. So this was something that we noticed there was some difficulties in the code and how to interpret that and how to implement that. And this is in the section primarily pertaining to zoning districts. But I just wanted to go through real quickly to kind of describe the differences, because the code, the way it was written, kind of muddled the terms together in different sections of the code. And just so that we have a clear understanding the difference between an accessory use and an accessory structure, I just put a couple of examples up here on a slide. And so to describe to you that an accessory structure is just that, it's a structure, it's a building, it's something you can touch. Something you might have to get a building permit for, most likely you will. There are some small shed exceptions that you wouldn't have to get a building permit for, but most likely you would get a building permit. It's actually a structure. Where a use is something you do, such as like a home occupation or a temporary mobile food dispensing vehicle could be an accessory use. It's something that's not permanently affixed to the property. So when we talk about accessory structures, we usually say you have to have a primary structure there first. So it could be, for example, here, this picture is a shed, so you would have a house before you could get an accessory structure permit. Or you might have a garage or a storage unit that's attached to a commercial business, so you'd have to have the commercial establishment there first before you could get the accessory structure, which is always detached from the primary structure. If it's attached, then it's considered part of the building. An accessory use may not necessarily need a primary use on the property. However, the proposed definition right now says that it is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for example, if you have something like a peddler that's on a piece of vacant property, that would be considered an accessory use because it's temporary, it's not permanent, it's not affixed to the property. So we might want to examine that as we move forward. And if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to kind of describe what we're proposing to change in the land development code. Back one, maybe? Yes. So right now we have in our zoning districts, we have a table pretty much. And it's structured so that the table has parts 1, 2, 3 through 7. And one of those parts is part 6, and it talks about accessory uses today. But it actually talks about structures under the accessory uses column. And it talks about pole barns and garages and greenhouses, but those are actually structures, not uses. So the recommendation is to delete all of the accessory uses out of the zoning district tables and each and every category, and then go past the zoning district tables and amend the language of section 2.04 and 2.05, which talk about accessory structures and accessory uses respectively. And then that's where we're making sure we're clear on what accessory structures are defined as, what accessory uses are defined as. So when we go to the code, it's not mishmashed throughout different sections. It's all right here. Accessory structures and the accessory uses language. So then subsequently we would need to renumber the remaining numbers in each of the zoning district charts so that they correspond, and we delete 6 and we'll move 7 up to 6 and so forth. In section 2.04, accessory structures, again, we're taking out other definitions that will go into the accessory uses section. Right now it defines a couple of different things, so taking out the principal use out of the accessory structures section and putting it into the accessory uses section, just kind of organizing it better so it reads and flows better. And again, the same with the accessory uses. If we can go to the next slide. I believe you have the adopted ordinance in your packet with the table and the other language and strike through and underline for the proposed change. The one thing I was noticing as I was reviewing this earlier is that I would recommend that we add this last clause that's underlined here on the slide to the definition of an accessory use. because you are going to have temporary uses that you're going to want to permit somewhere within the city. So this is where unless the accessory use is temporary in nature clause would apply. So if you have a peddler or somebody who wants to set up an ice cream kind of cart on a vacant property, that would be an accessory use. It would be temporary, it wouldn't be permanent on the property. So that I would recommend adding that. That's underlined. And unfortunately, it looks like when it converted to a PDF, we lost some of the underline on the next generation, sorry. These what you see are underlined should actually be stricken through. So if you can kind of put a period after accessory uses are permitted in all districts, period. And then this phrase that you currently have in the draft ordinance, after that be deleted, because it's going back to the definition, which we already talked about earlier in the section. Instead of reiterating that definition, let's just leave the definition in the appropriate place. We don't need to say it again, and I recommend we delete that portion, and then keep the last phrase, which is already there. So those are the main changes.
Okay.
And I'll take any questions you have.
I have one.
Sure.
Well, this next would be public comment.
Oh, sorry.
So, and that's everything. Anyone from the public have a comment they'd like to make? If you would, please come to the front, state your name, your address, and we'll listen to your comments.
Lisa Logan, Maryland. Are you going to discuss height on this at some point, or should I address that later? Height of accessory structures?
Oh, Laura, is that a part
It's
of this?
in there. Yeah,
Okay,
if
so
I can
later.
point that out to you, I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to also mention that right now you don't have any setbacks for accessory structures. And I would recommend you have either a 3 or 5 foot setback, and I would include that. I'm trying to juggle this as I'm saying.
Here, put your stuff back up here.
I had it.
My
So
question-
right now, if you look to section 2.04.01, there's a section G, standards, and it has a listing of 12 feet in residential or any zone that allows for single-family dwellings, and 24 feet in all other zoning districts for the height. I know we talked about that before, and we talked about 16 feet once upon a time. So we can discuss that, and then I would add the setback requirements as a number 3 to this section, to have a 3 or 5 foot, whichever you think is necessary from the property line for setback of accessory structures.
Can you direct me to where you're at 2.04?
2.04.01 G's, which is standards, and it might be at the bottom of the page after the chart, after the table. But G spills onto the next page.
Okay.
So right now it's 12 feet. We're not planning to change that, but what we did say was 12 feet for any district that allows single-family residential, and 24 feet for other zoning districts.
Okay.
Because I think it was 12 max across the board. Well, that's what it is currently.
So 12 feet maximum in any zoning district that allows single-family dwellings, 24 feet in all other zoning districts.
Yes.
And do we have, I've always been told that you can't have an accessory structure within the setback, which is 10 feet in the back,
That's
7.5 feet in the,
It's always been like that.
yeah.
We can keep it that way. Yeah. It's up to you.
It's always been like that, and what I couldn't find, and I looked today, and I know it was in there in 2016, the back setback, if you wanted to put a shed somewhere, accessory structure and shed, on the back setback, and I seen it in writing back in 2016, it said you could go half of that for residential. So residential had a 10-foot setback to the back. That would be for a house. If you were putting an accessory structure, it was 5 feet, because I got that for my building permit for my shed, and it was 5 foot, you could cut it in half. When I looked for that in this one, I couldn't find it, but it was in the 2016 version. Because that's when I got my permit.
That's interesting. I've never heard that.
Yep. And it was only for sheds for workshops. and it was on for the back setback, not the side, but it was the back setback.
I just want to make a comment regarding the setback as it's stated. Accessory structures shall not be located within any easement, obviously, required buffer, landscape area, or minimum building setback area.
Yep,
So
right there.
that's where it is, but I would just think about that for a minute. Because if, for example, tourist mixed use has a 20-foot rear setback, that means that last 20 feet you couldn't put a shed or anything at all.
Now, Laura, you do this for other municipalities and counties, what's common, or do you know?
3 or
any
5
other
feet
reference?
is common for an accessory structure.
I'd say 5 is probably more common.
Yeah.
Okay, and it sounds like 5 is what
It used to
you
be
think
there.
you
Yep.
saw.
I know 3 feet in Bay County, so
Okay,
that's what my garage is off my property line, so.
okay. And what do we need to do tonight? Come up with a recommendation that gets passed on the city
City
council for
council.
3, 5,
Yes.
10?
And the one other thing I just wanted to draw your attention to, just for consideration, you don't have to act on it tonight, we can if you want, in that same section 2.04.01, where it talks about minimum size of accessory structures. Total square footage for all accessory structures shall not exceed 75% of the square footage of the primary structure. That's a little on the large side, but if it's not a problem, then I don't see a need to change it, but
A little on the large side, again, compared to what you're...
25% is what I've seen in other places is the maximum for impervious, for a square footage from the primary structure.
75.
75 is almost as big as the primary, right?
Yeah,
So-
it's huge.
The other thing I've seen, Laura, too, is the no habitability, can't live in it. And second is some jurisdictions prohibit them in the front yard.
Yeah, I did add that, that they can't be in the front yard.
Okay.
But if we're going to, the only concern I have about livability is then if you want to allow accessory dwelling units, that would be a livable unit.
Explain that again.
An accessory dwelling unit would be
Oh,
a
accessory
detached.
dwelling unit.
Yeah, detached structure from the primary
Okay.
dwelling unit.
We've been down that road before.
So it seems like while we're doing this and straightening it out, we need to come up with a setback and either continue with the 75% or right size that to something that makes more sense.
Sure, yes, said well.
All right, anybody else from the public before, if you'll come up?
I didn't
Well-
know.
Lisa, was that?
No, I'm not through.
Okay,
I didn't get my chance. If you're not going to discuss the height limit and just leave it as it is, then I really have no issue with that. I was referring to the December meeting where you tossed about the idea of 16 foot. But if you're not going to change that, then I'm fine keeping it at 12. That was my point. If you're going to look at changing the rear setback to 3 or 5 feet, I think you should consider 5 feet, because with some of these smaller lots, 3 feet is just really awfully close. So, and also, if it's to be used in the future as an accessory dwelling, that's a whole nother can of worms that we've already gone into. So 12 feet height, at least 5 feet in the back. And again, I have always been told, and almost everybody I know has been told, 10 feet for the rear setback, just like a house. And if we can consider looking at the percentage, which is 75% of the primary structure, that's always seemed excessively large for an accessory structure to me. So I would encourage you to look at reducing that.
by how much, I'm curious.
Well, an accessory structure, because it's not supposed to be a living place, I would reduce it to 25 or 30%. I mean, 75% is enough house, actually. and that's awfully large. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And a question for Laura while we're still there. Lisa brought up the 16. Is that when we were having the discussion about essentially the pole barns and
Yes.
boats?
Yes.
So if a new home was built and they built an accessory structure that met pervious requirements, a pole barn holding a boat could be a maximum of 12 feet based on this. Is that right?
No,
16.
16.
Or you said 12.
It says 12.
It's 12 in there.
Garages and boat sheds are 16 currently. Accessory structures, which y'all were talking about as mostly storage sheds, are 12 currently.
So I think that's part of the,
Confusion.
yes, confusion.
There's
I'm
some
trying to
has
find
do
where it
with
says
development order going
16.
forward, so that's good.
I don't know if you know where 16 is. I know that was a number we talked about in this number, but I don't know where the 16 feet came from. Unless it's in another part of the
We talked
code.
about it in relation to the Driftwood separate chapel, and that's
Yeah.
not a single family location, and they had
Right.
a little steeple on it, so I think maybe that's part of how it was discussed, but,
The boat issue is also discussed, so.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
People with bigger boats wouldn't be able to get something inside a 12-foot tall structure.
What's customary there?
I don't know if there is a customary there. I'm not,
Says it right here, under, you have it in here, 20401, black and white, it says 12 feet maximum height in residential zoning, in commercial zoning district, 16 for garages, carports, and boat sheds.
okay, for some reason mine says 12, so I don't know if I have an old version.
And- Yeah, I know, but it never was. See, that's another change, because it's always been 16 feet.
Yeah. Is it
You know,
from,
mine was built in 2017, and my permit's good for 16 feet, everybody in my neighborhood.
Oh, I see where you're saying,
And they've
yeah,
been there.
yeah. So, yes, you're right, it's here. Yeah, so that would be 12 for the residential and 24 for others. So that's something that is the discretion of the city council also, and your recommendation goes forward accordingly.
Yeah, I think we should discuss that tonight and get that in there, one of these other changes.
We're gonna move it to the board portion, but did somebody else from the public like to come up?
John Harold, 43 First Street. Unless you're traveling west, then it's the first house in Bay County. Two questions. First question is, you say temporary, are we putting a time limit on temporary? How many months, how many years? When someone says
That's a whole other
temporary,
part of the code I would submit, that is something that would have to be defined in order to
so
measure
that's
it.
something y'all might want to consider recommending. My second question is, you talked about column 6 and you're taking the structures out of it. Did I understand that correctly?
The recommendation is to, I can show you if it helps, delete this column that says accessory uses, because the things listed in here aren't actually a use
Okay.
for buildings, for structures.
Okay, now, where do, on commercial property, where do lay-down yards fall? Is that a use?
So that is, if it's part of the business operations, it's part of the primary use.
Okay, but,
What was the question, John? Which part?
I'm sorry, lay-down yards, is that a use or is that a structure? And then if it's not
Well,
connected,
what's the laydown yard?
It's a use.
okay, there's one at the hardware store. There's one, the landscaper has back there on Fifth.
Okay, so
Those are lay-down yards.
building materials.
Building materials
Okay.
or machinery or whatever. It's, I mean, there's a
So
fellow,
if I store lawn equipment somewhere, that's a laydown yard?
that's yours?
I mean, is that what you think? I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I would
Okay,
say.
okay, that's what I'm trying
I
to-
don't know if the city has something, because as you've said, the codes are kind of convoluted depending on which section you read.
Yes.
So my question is, where do lay down yard, will that still remain in column 6 or will that,
So it is, so what you're talking about, I believe, is a primary use. And is there an office that's attached to the laydown yard for them, somebody to purchase the materials?
I don't know about the landscaper. There are Mango Marley's and then there's the laydown yard. The hardware store is on the other side of that designated shopping center. So it's not connected. I think he leases or rents the property. So I'm just throwing that out. And then if there's other
I
commercial
would think that
property in the
would sort
future.
of fall back to the definition of temporary, because
Well, it's been there over 2 years.
yeah,
So
well, still,
there
I
again,
don't
get back to
think
our
that's their
question,
intention to
what
have.
is
I'm
temporary?
guessing, I don't know, I haven't spoken to the hardware store, but
Right.
when they needed building
Well-
materials and everyone needed them, they
Sure.
negotiated this situation, but now it's
But
how
then,
long
I don't know
they'll
how
be there.
long you live over there, how
What
long?
hardware, what landscape are you
He's
talking about?
talking about over there where Daryl used
Where
to
the
have
pods-
his office and where they used to have the nursery and then
Didn't they
Kevin's
have-
got his little, that's what
And that's
he's
still
talking about.
used? Because they put some fencing, opaque fencing around that.
Yeah, I requested that to be done because they didn't meet what's in the ODC. But that's all zoned for commercial. That's
Okay.
That's all
But I'm
commercial
just,
in there.
that's why I'm asking, where does that fall in the line? Does it stay in that column 6 or does it move? That's just a question for y'all to consider.
Okay.
It sounds like it's a primary use of the property, if that's all they're doing there.
Okay, well, eventually that yard's going away because I understand we're gonna have a restaurant there,
That's-
right?
that's-
No, well, that's what's been brought up at, right, Chris?
Yeah, they're working on it.
Yeah. So it's going away. That's why I asked what is just, these are things for y'all to consider,
Good questions.
okay?
You're right, the whole code needs a lot of help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more public comment on this? If not, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the board for comments.
Well, I've got a question for Laura, but you have analysis in here, you have, in order to more effectively implement these requirements, the definition of a principal structure should be considered for revision due to significance in determining allowable accessory structures. As written, the definition provided for principal structure includes dwelling unit, house, or commercial use. The term commercial use is misleading in the definition of the structure because it implies you can have a principal structure that solely is present for commercial use. Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, Ace Hardware is the principal thing, and that's commercial. Why do you want to change the definition? To me, just changing that definition for dwelling, I mean, if a dwelling could be anything, somebody could buy a lot and put a gigantic pole barn on there to park RVs underneath it, and next to that, they could have accessory structures as just little tiny workshops.
I'm not quite sure I'm following your question.
Well, you're saying that right now, we list, okay. As written, the definition of a principal structure includes a dwelling unit, house, or commercial use. Why are you changing those definitions? I mean, it's either dwelling unit, house, or commercial use.
So you're asking why I don't recommend listing those things. That's why the definition has been revised. I think that the principal use is, or the principal structure is what's happening, the activity or the structure that is the primary intent of the property. Does that help?
Well, yes, it does, but I mean, when you're looking at, when you say principal structure,
So the proposed definition is the main building or other structure on a lot that is utilized for the property's principal use. That's the revised definition that I'm recommending.
it seems like we already covered that the way we have it. That's my question, is why change it?
Well, because we're listing a dwelling unit, a house, or commercial use.
That's pretty much it.
It's not a use, it's a structure. When we're trying to define structure, it's really about what the built thing is.
You want to remove uses from the structure.
Yes. Yes. So the proposed definition is the main building or other structure on a lot that is utilized for the property's principal use. So that would be, could be a house, could be a restaurant, could be, there's so many things it could be depending
Example
on.
of structures.
I guess it'll still be in the column for the different zoning districts, so it'll stay there that way. drawing your columns.
Well, you
what
still
can
have
and can't
principal, you still, so, and you have,
Prohibited uses, basically. You're not gonna delete any prohibited uses that were in there anyway.
I haven't touched that. No,
Okay.
that's still there. Yeah, table, columns, the columns 3 and 5 in each of the zoning district tables are not recommended to be changed. It wasn't the task I had at this juncture.
Have you ran into, with that, all these places that you deal with for accessory structures, since, I mean, you're eliminating anything that's written in that column? Somebody coming up with something bizarre, they want to build next to their house in somebody's backyard?
Well, it has to be related to the primary use. So, I mean, you couldn't put, I don't know,
I
a
mean, have
coffee
you run
shop
into
as an
anything
accessory
kinda-
use to a residential home. You couldn't do that. First of all, it's not an allowable use in that category. And it's not dependent upon the primary structure or use.
Okay, so eliminating everything under the accessory, what can be there hasn't caused a problem anywhere, pretty much.
I've never seen it written this way before, honestly.
Okay, okay.
It's usually more generally written.
See, I'm used to seeing it written one way, so I
Right.
kind of lived here, so,
Right,
okay. Thank you.
sure.
So to sum up your analysis and recommendations, it's to strike what you have stricken
Yes,
in the definitions and accept this accessory structure. Accept it as 12 feet maximum height in any zoning district that allows single-family dwellings unless someone else
yep,
wants to change that. Correct?
correct, yep.
Since we talked about that, does anyone on the board
Yes.
want to revisit that?
Yes, yes. The simple reason, it should all be the same. I've always had a problem with commercial/residential. Commercial/residential, if you want to build a house there, you can build it higher than 32 feet. And you can also build, like I said, something bigger, 24 feet, which is in there. 16 feet should just be the limit. That covers low density, regular residential. It moves it around to where commercial residential is. So if you put a limit on it for 12 feet for accessory structures and just use garages and pole barns as 16 feet, that would cover it all, across everything right there.
So if you recall, part of the reason why this commercial differential came into play is because of chapel, which is greater than 24 feet, I think even, with the steeple.
Well, I think chapels and isn't it crosses and
It's an
something else,
accessory.
there's the state law, there's no, you can go as high as you want. That can't be regulated by a city.
I'm not aware of a state law regarding
I'm not even,
the heights of a chapel steeple.
But a steeple doesn't have a regulation.
your land development code typically regulates that.
When your grandfather, did he go back to the same footprint? Why do you allow it?
Well, I don't know, that's another thing that we need is grandfathering policies or regulations. And I think, without looking right now, there might be something in the plan about that. But I don't know if we have, want to look into that right now.
So, was some of the height difference related to proportionality at all? Because we did talk about if you're in a neighborhood of typical
We could do
one-story
it that way.
homes.
Yeah, we could do a
16
percentage.
is up here, and it sounds like if you're in a commercial area, that it does allow for
Mhm.
greater height. Proportionally, a dwelling unit might look aesthetically
Sure.
accurate if it was
We
tall.
could do it as high as the principal use. Is the height limit.
Why can't commercial, residential, why shouldn't residential and commercial be also 32-foot height, just like everybody else in low density or regular residential, just like 16-foot max height for a pole barn or a garage?
So what is your
Why should
proposal?
commercial residential, right now, they go higher than 32 feet and they can build 24 feet, 30 feet high for a pole barn. We've got a couple of them back here that have pole barns sitting there that are huge off of 15th Street where it's a commercial property.
So what is your suggestion?
My suggestion is change it to all of it the same. Anything where there's a regular residential house, whether it's on commercial property, it should be regulated to 16-foot height for a boathouse or a garage, and 12 foot for accessory structure, and the house should be 32 feet, just like everywhere else.
It's not that now?
No.
Right now, I'm.
House 32, accessory structure 12, road 16.
I think what I hear you're saying, let me make sure I understand what I think you're saying, is you prefer the 16 feet for the pole barns to be able to store boats on property with a house.
Yes, you have to have 16 feet. Everybody has
Okay.
a top on their boat or
And
whatever.
so your
It's gotta be
concern with
16 foot.
commercial is what?
I don't have a concern with
Okay.
commercial. I have a concern with commercial residential. Because when somebody builds a house in commercial residential district, they can build a house there. They don't have to put up an Ace Hardware store. You can build, half of our property now is residential and commercial.
So
Well,
you're,
I asked, but is
yeah.
that accurate though? If you build a home on a commercial lot, you can exceed the allowable height of a home because you're on a commercial lot? Is that accurate?
no.
Pole barns can go higher. You can go back and look at that.
Pole barns, yes.
So if the primary use is a residential unit,
Yes,
then the accessory structure follows the principal use.
Yes.
So you can't,
You can't
you
pick one and,
you can't pick the
Can't
house
mix and match.
residential and the accessory structure for commercial.
Let me see what it's written right here. Black and white.
but it might be simpler just to have a ratio to the primary structure rather than the number of feet. Other than, that might not accommodate your boat pole barn. If you have a low house,
It's residential and non-commercial.
yes.
That's what you're
Unfortunately.
talking about.
Yes,
So
Fix that for
if
us.
your height limit in a straight commercial district, even though you build a house in there, is a different height than what you're allowed in a straight residential land use category, is that what you're talking about?
For accessory structures.
And then, well, and-
For
and
accessory structures.
you're saying that because the height in a commercial land use district is higher allowed,
48 feet.
48 feet.
that you could then put an accessory structure up to that limit? Is that what your thinking is?
We have them up to 24 feet on 15th Street, and they're just pole barns, but they're huge, they're way up in the air.
Okay, and you would prefer 16 feet for pole barn across the board?
Across the board, everywhere.
So if just, and I have no dog in this fight, but if you make it, whatever you decide, and there are structures out there that are taller than that, then they're considered non-conforming. And if they're damaged by 50% or more, then they can't rebuild to what they were. They'll have to conform to the new height limit.
And if they're commercial storage yards that are built for the purpose of storing big boats and big RVs, and
Then
that's
it's,
their principal purpose. Then
If it's-
then
if
you'd be
it's-
capping those.
if
to
it's a
accessory.
boatyard, the principal use is the boatyard.
Yeah.
So it can be
That's
48 feet.
They're 48 feet because it's commercial strictly.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're just talking about accessory.
This would be a separate height limitation for just accessory
Accessory
structures.
structure. What's your question, Lee?
Can we go back to what the original, I know that this is part of it, what was your original recommendation? It was about the definition of accessory use and structure, is that correct?
Part of it,
Part
yeah,
of it.
part of the recommended changes include the definitions, yes. I know it's it's very complicated, I get how it can be, hard. I think what Rock is concerned with is the height. So you could go with a percentage of the height of the principal structure, which in every district except 2 is 32 feet. And the 2 that it's not is, general commercial is 48 feet, and tourist, I thought it was tourist mixed use is 48 feet. Everything else is 32 feet.
But
then if
on the
you-
principal structure.
But then if you go with a percentage, aren't you going to come up primarily with higher than the 12 and 16 feet?
It's possible,
Why can't
just
you-
like you did, you have a 75% of the main structure for floor area. That's what I was thinking, you do a percentage of the existing structure, not of the maximum height of the zoning district, but of the existing structure. So you
Well-
don't have something towering, accessory towering over your primary structure.
The problem with that is, we're the fishing village. It used to be the small fishing village, but anyway, most of the people here have boats. So if you have a regular house and it's only so tall, and you do a percentage of that, you're not gonna have any place to park your boat. The original intent was what was written here, they didn't want everybody to have a storage shed in their backyard that was 16 feet tall. They wanted them 12 feet tall, because you usually don't see if your house is up in the air 14, 16 feet or whatever. And you needed a pole barn 16 feet high to keep your boat in, because you got a hard top on it or a fly bridge, whatever. And that was the original intent of making that 16 feet. And that's why it's written in here for pole barns or garages to be 16 feet high. And if you change that to a percentage, it's gonna really cause headaches for people. who
It's
are
up to
building
you to
that.
change it,
No,
I'm
I'm
just
just
trying
saying, I'm
to
just
guide
saying.
you, yes.
And that's the reason why it was kept at 16 feet and 12 feet, so everybody wouldn't build a 12-foot workshop in their backyard. And like Lisa talked about, and you talked about the percentage in here, that's the other subject we need to talk about, because that should be knocked down to 50%. 75% is huge, and believe me, when you have a 900-foot house next to you, and their pole barn is almost the size of their house, it's actually taller
Well,
than.
what you could do is have your limits, then have an exception for boat storage on premise to 16 feet, if that's what the city wants. You can have your limit for, your sheds, your whatnot, of 12 feet, and then you can have an exception to 16 feet just for boat storage.
And
Isn't
garages.
that what we've got?
It's not well written, but I think that's the intent.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said the original, our LDC says garages and boat homes, because if you have a pickup truck now, it's almost like 7.5 feet in the air, and to build a garage has to be over 12 feet just to get it in there with an 8-foot high door with the beams above it. So that's why they say
guess, yeah, it
garages
depends on how tall your
and
truck
pole
is.
barn 16 feet.
So like, how tall is yours?
I got rid of my big dually, but it was high.
No, I mean, where your camper is, how tall is yours?
Well, that's 16 foot. That's 16 foot, neighbor 16 foot. Everything that's built in my neighborhood, which is a big residential neighborhood, is 16 feet. Nobody builds 14 feet, and if you look at it, like my neighbor behind me, he just has a regular 26-foot boat, nothing huge, and just his hard top over where he sits, he could barely get under there. He just makes it by a couple inches, and that's not a huge boat.
Is a pole barn impervious?
Yes, it's
Impervious.
anything that rain cannot penetrate through.
Yeah.
So if rain
Even
can't go
on
through
the
it,
sides, rain can come in.
but it's not going underneath.
It's impervious.
So if that's the case, then your lot size will determine whether you can do
Your impervious
75%
surface ratio.
or 25%.
Yes,
Because of what your footprint is on there, you can only do 40%.
if it's being checked in the accessory use permit stage, you're correct.
So
Exactly.
that would knock that 75, unless you got a large,
And there are those
Extremely large
cases, and
lot.
that's why this needs to be clarified, because there are large lots where
Right.
you could absolutely do that. But
and it
the
wouldn't
scale is
be
still
so
awkward.
big next to a house.
John, my lot, as an example, is .36. There's 3 blocks in that residential neighborhood that has .36 lots, which are the biggest ones in the whole thing. And that's why I made my house up on pilings, because my RV pole barn and my little workshop in the backyard, I am at max for pervious.
Right.
So I can't go an inch bigger. I put it up in the air, otherwise all my stuff will be parked out in the sun. So I can park my cars underneath and do stuff like that. I was one of the people who actually read the code and built what it's supposed to build. So,
I got 100 square feet left.
there you go.
All right, let's try to wrap this one up and get a motion to accept this as written, or to change to a different height. if you
Height
wanna
and
do that.
setback, if you want to
And
address the
setback.
setback.
Well, in size, if you're gonna do
The
size.
75% if you want to, right, thank you.
All right, so the 3 variables are the height, the setback, changing that to 5 or 3 is consistent with Bay County. Then this percentage use, moving it from 75 to as far down as 25 like Bay County, or 50 in between. Does anyone have
I have,
a motion you'd like to bring forward? You do?
have a motion to bring forward to make residential height 32 feet per building.
Well, that we're not,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
that's not changing.
Pole barns and garages 16 feet. All other accessory structures 12 feet. Accessory size of from 75% to 50%. And rear setback to 5 feet for all
Any
districts.
setback from the property line. We
From the
don't want to
property line.
differentiate, okay.
Back or side?
5 foot setback
5-foot setback,
and 50% of the primary.
75 to 50, and 16, keep what we have, 16 feet for garages and boathouses, and 12 feet for all other accessory structures.
In any zoning district, so no difference between commercial and residential.
Commercial can still do what they want. They can go up to 48 feet.
Well, it's, no,
But
not as an accessory. This will cover any accessory structure in the whole city, no matter the zoning category.
And as it stands now, an accessory structure in a commercial is 24, is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 24.
That's not the way it's written. It's written as 12. That's why we had the problem with the chapel.
Is there any commercial property here with anything on it that has any buildings that are higher than 16 feet?
The chapel.
Just the chapel?
I haven't done an inventory, but I know that's at least one.
What else you got?
How high is the, on 15th Street, how high are the boat dock, or the boat shed?
Is that the primary use?
That's primary?
Yeah, it's 40, it has a height limit of 48 feet if it's commercial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because if we change it, then if something happens and we have a storm, then then they would have to go to the new. They
Correct.
couldn't go back to the old.
That's right,
Well, they would say 48 because that's their primary commercial.
for primary.
That
Yes.
wouldn't change, just an accessory
We're
structure.
just
Yeah, I'm
talking
just
should
trying
have
to
to
think
change.
of if there's something that we're not thinking about.
Well, the only thing they found so far was the chapel for being built that was higher than it should have been, and that got grandfathered back.
Okay, so we have a motion, but is that, does it need to be completed with a commercial accessory structure
So
height?
it's your discretion. Right now, I have 12 for an accessory structure with an exception of a boat/RV storage structure at 16 feet.
Okay, go to that quick. Since commercial can go 48 feet high
As a primary.
as a primary,
The chapel is an accessory structure to the hotel.
and accessory should probably be 16, just like the pole barns and the garage. That should stay the same. So even in commercial, accessory should be 16 feet.
So I'll describe that
Yeah.
as a residential versus a non-residential, rather than commercial. Okay.
Is that your motion?
That's the motion.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay, accessory size be reduced from 75% to 50%. Rear setback on
And
property
side setback.
for accessory use, 5 foot.
Side and rear.
You said rear,
Five.
side and rear
Right.
setback.
Rear.
Side and rear.
You need to have 5 anyway,
Yeah,
because you may have one in the very corner.
yeah.
and you-
Yeah, you're saying
Okay.
rear,
Okay.
just side and rear.
Okay, okay, side and rear. 12-foot accessory height for accessories, 16 foot for garages and boathouses. And commercial, still 48,
Yeah, it's unchanged.
and commercial residential should be 32.
Wait.
Well, because
We're trying to, I think, define accessory structure in
Right.
commercial.
So the 48 feet doesn't apply here because that's the primary structure limit.
In commercial property, accessory structure, 16 feet.
Okay,
There we go.
non-residential property. is the way I'll-
Non-residential.
I got that.
Okay. All right, we have a motion. Would anyone like to second that motion?
And that includes the other changes she had.
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there any interest in seconding that motion? You guys need more time or just not interested in that at this point?
I'm just trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anything in town. I'm
I'm
trying to
concerned.
drive through the streets.
I mean, I can make a second to vote, but I'm concerned about the commercial portions,
So what's that?
the limiting that. 16 feet is not very high.
Well, that's for accessory structures, not for commercial. Commercial's still 48.
So proportionally for commercial, you're suggesting that it might be higher than 16? Because you're proportionally next to up to a 48-foot structure.
We're doing half of that at 24 feet.
What would you think about that?
I'm not versed enough to say what that number is, but I don't believe 16 is the number. We don't have to be in 100% agreement.
So there's a motion, you either got to second the motion and vote on it, or the motion dies for lack of second.
Understood. So the motion dies for lack of a second.
Let me bring a second motion up. Accessory size, from 75 to 50% reduction, setback back inside to 5 foot. Keep in all residential, 12 foot for accessory and 16 feet for garage and boathouses, just like it is now. And commercial for accessory structures, 24 feet.
Just for clarification, because you have commercial zoning districts that allow residential uses, the way I had phrased it this time was any zoning district that allows single-family dwelling was limited to 12 feet.
12 feet and 16 feet for boathouse or a,
Because that'll cover
Garage.
a lot of your concern anyway, because a lot of your commercial districts allow single-family residential.
yes, yes.
You'll just
All
get
right.
it to, yeah.
So we have a new motion.
But are we sure what the steeple is on the church?
I'm not positive on that. Ever since it was approved by city council, it started going back through the review process, and it's been stuck in
Well, that's,
floodplain.
Well,
that's a concern of mine, because God forbid, that's not a primary use, and God forbid we ever have another storm and it gets destroyed, then we gotta go through this again. And that is one of my main concerns right now.
Well, it's kind of like the swing at the hotel, going back to a grandfather clause for
Well, if you
Activation.
grant a variance,
activation.
We only
Yeah,
allow
well, there's
variances
variances
for-
here, not like they are anywhere else
No.
anymore.
yeah.
Well, that's
Pretty
for setback.
strict.
That means,
Bulk
that's
regulations
basically
only.
for setback and stone.
all right, so we have a motion right now, and it's at 24 feet in commercial. Is there a second for that motion or not? And if not, it dies for lack of a second. So where do we go from here with city council?
So you have to make a recommendation, up or down. Maybe,
if, Julie, if you understood that the exception sounds like it's the chapel, if that was less than
The
24,
chapel or anything that's in town that maybe we're not sitting here thinking of right this second, because God forbid we don't think about something. I mean, I know we're just a advisory board, I understand.
I'd be willing to make Rock's motion without the commercial
Yeah.
addition to it. And I don't remember his whole motion over there.
So in essence, allow an accessory structure and a commercial accessory structure to have no height limit.
Well, it would be 48 feet, wouldn't
I would rather say that to be sure than, because, yeah, I mean, I think you're correct, but because we're listing other accessory structure heights, I think we should
be
do,
consistent.
yeah. So we could say 48 feet, or we could say the height of the zoning district, because there are some that are 32.
Height of the zoning district is probably a better wording.
So is that another motion that essentially,
So as we talk through this, yes, I will, but I'm not, now it makes me look like I want to be 48-foot accessory structures, and I want to say that that's not what I'm necessarily proposing. I said this to begin with, that I don't know what that number is. I don't believe that it was 12, I don't think it's 16. But I don't know what it is.
Question for the attorney then.
it? Well, you got.
Forget about the hurricane, we can come
two
back and
choices.
make a variance for that. You
Either
don't,
make a recommendation or you don't.
Right.
You're worried about particular structures that you can't think of on the spot. I mean, certainly 48 feet or whatever the height limit is of the primary structure. I mean, I'm here in the chapel, I haven't driven around to see if there are other tall accessory structures, but is the chapel less than 48 feet?
It's not
Yes.
up, it's not there.
But it's definitely less than 48
Yes.
feet though.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact height, but I know it's more than 16. I think it was in the 20s.
For some reason, I think you're right along.
Yeah.
But I can't remember what she said, and I can't remember.
Are they under time crunch, Laura?
No,
So you could defer theoretically and go do your investigation and see what's out there. But that just kicks it down the road another month or however long before you all meet.
I think you had an almost motion, so I want to find out before we stop.
I mean, I'll do it with that, with with her recommendation that the, not recommendation, of saying that we put a number in there, that 48 feet, but
well, how about this? What if we say for accessory structures that are not on a single-family residential primary use are limited to that which is the height of the zoning district?
which would be either 32 or 48 for the other one. I'll do that for a motion. And so that would be the things that, and I don't.
Well, the
I'm
stuff
sorry.
Mark said, we
I'm
got it
sorry.
captured, I believe. Did we, Jamie?
It's on here.
Okay.
I've got it written
Video.
down. I've got it written down.
All right. So essentially, we're just agreeing that commercial is to the height of the district.
Non-residential.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
All right. We have a motion, we have a second. Tammy, if you'd call for a vote.
Okay, Mr. Crease,
yes.
Mr. Kerrigan,
Yes.
Mr. Elzey.
Yes.
Ms. Gardner.
Yes.
All right, the next item is discussion of language regarding food trucks in LDC.
So, there was some information prepared for you. In your packet, you have a copy of the Florida statute that regulates, we're gonna call them food trucks tonight, just for the sake of not having to say mobile food dispensing vehicles every single time. But the statute defines those as basically a self-propelled or otherwise movable from place to place self-contained with utilities, gas, water, electricity, liquid waste disposal, and such. The only thing that you are not allowed to do as a city is to regulate them for their operations. So you can't go in and check their food inventory and make sure they're operating safely. But you can regulate where they go, how long they can be there, the hours of operation, whether or not they actually have to move. Other things that landscaping, parking, you can regulate all of that. You just can't regulate the food preparation part. That's up to the state to permit. You can't permit that. So right now, as some of you are, or not all of you are aware, the regulation that we have in our LDC is confusing at best, and I went back to review a email that the attorney at the time wrote regarding this issue, and this was in 2020, and his opinion was that the intent of, and I didn't write it, so I didn't write the current regulation, but that the intent at the time was to prohibit, they were trying to differentiate between an actual motorized truck and a trailer. And when I say trailer, they didn't want food operations coming out of a mobile home type of trailer. And so that's why they were trying to create a different definition for a food trailer and a food truck. It just wasn't, it doesn't work well the way it's written. So I think what we're here tasked tonight is to have some discovery and conversation regarding what you would like to see. We do regulate location right now, but not much more. There can be problems, or I would hate to say problems, but conditions that we might not be thinking of when we allow them to be there permanently. Some locations have a maximum amount of hours. They can be in any one place at one time. Because they want them to not so much compete with restaurants, and I know we don't have a big restaurant activity going on here right now, and that they are much needed here in Mexico Beach. There is concern of, if you're there all day, where does the employee use the restroom? If you have too much impervious surface overhead, how is the stormwater being accounted for? Where is that going when it's rolling off a sheet metal roof? How is it being captured? Parking is a problem. Sanitary facilities can sometimes be a factor. When you need a place to wash your hand before you eat, there might not be one. That kind of thing. So we're here to discover from everyone as to some opinions that there are regarding food trucks and how we want to regulate them. I believe that was the task. Is that right, Chris? Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I mean, talk to the attorney for a second. Just for the record, I went to every food truck and talked to the individuals. I only missed one, and that was Bad Mama Dama. So I know if I went on residential property, I have to say I was there a certain time and date. So I was there 3:29, between 2 o'clock and 3:30. I visited every site, looked at it, see what was on there, and I talked to the people who ran the businesses, just to see what problems they were having and things like that. That's unbelievable.
Glad you did that. What did you learn?
Well, I mean, they're all concerned about stuff, and when I went and looked at everything, the only thing that I found that they're doing against what's in our LDC right now, we have, actually, it's right in here in the chart, it tells you all your properties, your division. We're supposed to have a buffer. So if you have commercial, and all these properties, if you look at the zoning map, they're all residential, and zoning districts that border them, according to our chart, they have to be separated by a buffer. And the buffer is 10 foot, and it could be trees, a fence, or whatever. The only one of all of these that even has that is Tex-Mex. The owner did put a fence up before they were even there. I started out, I went down and talked to Killer Seafood, and Mike, he had his business there, he had fencing behind it. Now he's got his food truck there, behind it is the condos back there. Nobody else has a fence. I'll go from the pillar, he's got his one big thing there, he has a hand wash, he has a porta potty there. Tex-Mex, they got 3 food trucks and a trailer, he has a fence. He doesn't have a hand facility or a porta potty. 27th Street, they have basically nothing there, there's no fence. Next to them is a slab. It used to be a house, and that was just a trailer sitting on it, it was basically illegal to start with.
That's not on the food truck lot though, that's another lot.
Yeah, that's another lot, that's commercial property. I mean, that's residential, but, I mean, that's, shouldn't even be there to start with. They have 2 trailers, one's the taco one, and the other one's Shaved Ice, which is, the guy does the rentals, the bike rentals, and the carts. And I talked to the guy doing the tacos, he doesn't speak English, so his wife or whoever was talking to me, they translated. He's trying to get a hold of the guy next to him, which is on commercial, to see if he can rent that lot for parking. And he didn't know how to go about that. I told him, come down to the city, they'll get the information, his address, name, you can write him a letter, you can maybe get a phone number and talk to him and try to find that. That's what he wants to do the parking thing. I drove down 27th Street in my golf cart. You get down the end of the street, I'd make a 3-point turn, so in a golf cart. That's how narrow the street is. So anybody who's going down there, they're pulling into people's driveways all the time. So there's a lot of people coming in there, there really isn't a whole bunch of parking except right on the side there, a couple in the front. The police department put cones out there, which is helping, but people still going down there. And that's pretty much the same as it is on any restaurant we're gonna have, because we don't have parking anywhere. I mean, that's pretty much there. I went to Point Break Pizza and the barbecue place next to it. Point Break has a porta potty and a hand wash station next to it. The barbecue has a porta potty but no hand wash. And there's no fence, and Point Break said he already talked to the owner about putting if he could put a fence up, and the owner said, sure, if you want to pay for it, go ahead and do that. I think the biggest problem that's coming in is all this, is that it's in our regulations, or LDC, there's supposed to be a buffer between that and residential. And every one of these food truck lots borders on residential. And it says it's right there, it says right there, point blank, even if it's separated by a street, it's supposed to have a buffer.
If you look at that in the land development regulations, it talks about incompatible uses. So like 27th Street, it's a vacant lot is next to it. It's not an incompatible use, it's a vacant lot. So there's confusion on zoning and uses.
Well, a vacant lot is a vacant lot, but that is zoned as residential.
Okay.
That lot is residential. So
But
it's
it's a vacant
residential
lot.
and it's commercial right next to each other.
But there's no house there, there's no use, it's a vacant lot.
Well, yeah, it's a vacant lot, but it's zoned residential. So everything that's zoned according to what's in our LDC is supposed to be separated.
I'm just saying, if you look in the LDC, it talks about buffers are required for incompatible uses.
I don't know if incompatible uses would be an empty lot of residential. I don't think that would be incompatible.
And I'm just telling you why there's no buffer being enforced on those that you're
Well,
talking
there's
about.
none on any of them. None of them have a buffer. The only one that has a buffer is Tex-Mex, and that owner had a fence there before. So everybody, if you're looking at what's in there, is not in compliance right now for what's there.
Is there a compliance standard
For,
for these food truck lots? I mean,
so
I'm
that-
not saying they're not in compliance now, but is there enforcement standards?
So here's the issue with, you have a part A and a part B of the regulation. Part A is the food trailers, which attempted to exclude food trucks from the definition. So if we're talking about food trucks, which the statutory definition would consider them all the same, they can be moved. So the statutory definition would consider them all food trucks, which is the 509 statutory definition. So I'm looking at it now, Rock, and can you direct me to the 10? Food trucks shall be set back a minimum of 10 feet from all property lines to comply with all applicable setback rules for the property, whichever is greater. So if the property has a 20 foot, then they have to be 20 feet.
4.01.06 required landscaping, it has C buffer zone, and then there's a
Can
chart
you
on the
say that
back.
citation again, please? 4 point,
4.01.06, and on the second page behind that is the chart that gives your table of incompatible adjacent
well, herein
districts.
lies the problem. If they are a permanent structure, they would go through the development order process, but they're not going through the
Well, I
development
know,
order
they're not gonna be
process.
permanent.
Because they're not considered permanent, but they have become permanent with the construction that's gone over some of them. So,
Well, you know, you talk about that, I'm gonna go back to right after the hurricane. And what started all this confusion, I went to all these meetings, and it was discussed for, Lisa was there, she knows, it was discussed for months and months. And Killer Seafood, whose restaurant was wiped out, wanted to put up his food trailer. He has a nice trailer, you can see it down there, it's not one of your little tow arounds, it's a big one. And that was the whole thing, that was his property. He owned that property, but couldn't afford to rebuild. So
I was at that meeting,
the city
and I
went-
remember the discussion.
went way back.
And
the whole thing
it was meant to
food-
be temporary until he could build back.
Well, the food truck and the food trailer was back and forth, kind of like golf carts and LSDs. You know, you got to beat somebody inside the head and tell them, oh, it's got a license plate, it's an LSD, you can drive it on 98. It's the same thing, they argued back and forth. Just like putting up his pole barn over that for the weather. And he got a variance for that, to be able to do that, and saying that when he no longer has the trailer there, and it has to be removed, he'll take that down. He'll take that structure down. So that was approved.
I'm not arguing with you, I'm just saying that it's not being reviewed as a development order. So no stormwater's being checked, no parking's being checked, no landscaping's being checked. Because it's not, they're not submitting as a development order. They're just getting approval to go on the site.
But for us, for our discussion, for the recommendation, to keep everything here, just like they're having problems where 27th Street. The biggest thing that everybody seems to be annoyed about is that it's in their face. You had your house and you used to have, at the end there, a two-story condo or whatever, and now there's food trucks sitting there. So now your house is looking at trailers and stuff where if there was a fence there, us sitting here should be able to say, hey, whether you're temporary or not, because that's commercial against residential, we want this followed for that and having a barrier put up to make it look better for the people living there.
Now, Laura, is that, you're saying this is discovery tonight, so is that the purpose of this? I see sort of three things here. Recommend naming mobile food dispensing vehicles, is it adopting that
Yeah,
name?
I'm recommending adopting the Florida statute definition, yes.
Sounds appropriate. Recommend a clear and concise definition between food truck or trailer.
Well, the statute would take care of that, the statutory definition would take care of that.
And then if there, you're saying now, we can make recommendations of what we want this to be and look like regarding sanitation or buffer separation, et cetera.
Yes,
Is that going to be in the form of a motion or just information moving on to the city council?
if I could get some feedback, then I can work on rewriting the section of the code that speaks to food trucks and come back with a proposal. So if fencing is part of it, that can be something I can write in.
But your point is that they're temporary as opposed to permanent.
But yes, so that's part of it. What is temporary? Do we need to have a definition of temporary? How many months? How many hours a day even? If it's temporary, it could be there for however many years, but maybe it's only there for 6 hours a day. That's temporary. Some local governments don't allow the picnic tables because they're supposed to be temporary, and it's a come and go situation.
Some only allow it in commercial landing stations.
Yeah, Mexico Beach is a little bit more unique situation than most other governments, having been 90% wiped out, and probably more than 90% in the sit-down restaurant category. We used to have 11 and we now have 1.
Laura, do you remember, was there any time limit, or how was the variance for killer seafood?
So I don't recall them discussing a time limit. I just recall him mentioning it was going to be temporary until he could build back.
There was a time limit. I think it was originally 2 years, and then I think he was given another year extension. I'd have to go back and check my notes, but there was a time limit, and that time limit has long since passed.
Jack, could you allow citizens' comments? I'd like to make a recommendation.
If this is discovery, yes, I think so.
Tim Leonard in St. Francis Street. So what I would recommend you guys start with is determining what the issue or issues is, because I think it came to the council, there were a lot of complaints about probably one particular food truck, but there have been complaints about some of the other ones. So what are the issues associated with food trucks, and also identify what things you would recommend to correct those or change those or add to the code. I think Laura could advise you again on what we currently regulate, which I think is very minimal, and what we could regulate. And then based on what you've identified as the issues are, then you could recommend maybe some further regulation, whether it's porta potties or restrooms or hand washing facilities, buffers, parking, what temporary is. I mean, that would be my recommendation how to approach this.
Thanks. I think for me, the only issues that I'm aware of are the research that Rock has done and gone and reported, because Tim, you said there are a lot of complaints to the city council, but we're sort of being asked to make recommendations, and I don't know what any of those complaints were. I've never heard about this until tonight.
You know, just to add, when I talked to everybody, 3 of the trucks, I mean, they would love to do a permanent business, especially Point Blank Pizza. He'd love to find a chunk of property that he could afford to build a full-time place. You know, and I mean, you look at their business people, and they're just trying to put something here for everybody to use, and they're trying to do the best they can without getting complaints against it. You know, I talked to them, that's what I wanted to find out. You know, what are the issues you're having? And pretty much it came out to the parking and like fencing, like I said, about separating them from the residential. So if you got a house there, you're not just looking at a couple of food trailers sitting there, or how many. But I mean, they all in business trying to make a living, and several of them would love to be able to afford a chunk of commercial property. I mean, that's a hard thing. I mean, Killer, he owns his property, and he's having just to build back how much it would cost it is insane now.
But so one of the last meetings, one of the things was talked about that particular lot on 27th Street, that it used to be a duplex. But in the same city council meeting, it was also brought up that we need to stop building residential in our commercial district. So now we have a food truck that wants to operate a business in a commercial area, but we're saying, no, we want it to be residential. So I don't think we can tell people in one sentence this, and in the next sentence this, because I don't think we can get into this one looks better than this one. I'm scared that's gonna, I'm not an attorney, but I'm scared that's gonna wind up getting us in trouble going, we like the way you look, but we don't like the way you look. I'm scared of that.
The rules need to be effective.
Yeah.
And they'll apply across the board.
I will say that at our February 5th visioning session for this grant that we're working on, the coastal character and charm of Mexico Beach was high on the list. So if there's a way to incorporate some of that preference, local preference, I think you can regulate aesthetics to a certain point. I don't think you can be over the top, but I think landscaping is part of it. There's ways to incorporate what you're trying to achieve through your vision that we're presenting tomorrow night, if you all can be here tomorrow night.
Comments open? Hey, Scott Caro, Mexico Beach. I guess I got a couple of questions, little
Scott, could you
bit.
just give an address just for the record?
No, people from Port St. Joe don't have to. Continuing. Everyone keeps talking about Killer Seafood. I don't understand. I mean, yeah, maybe they were supposed to be temporary and they haven't built their building and now they're considered permanent. I mean, are you actually considering telling Killers, well, sorry, you gotta build a building or you gotta go out of business? I don't even know why you're talking about it.
Oh, no,
Are you really at that point?
Sorry, I'm the one who brought it up. I brought it up because he was the first one to do that for his restaurant, and that was a big topic of discussion for the city council way back after the hurricane. And believe me, everybody was for him having that. Nobody wants to take that away whatsoever. He was the first one to put it in there, but it was a big to-do because we haven't had anything like that before. So that was a big discussion right after the hurricane, and that's why I brought it up. I use him as the example because he's got, I mean, his place is set up really nice. He did a great job, just like his restaurant that was there before. And, you know, when you go around, you look at all the places, how they can set things up and make it a little nicer, which people were complaining about, some of these other places they didn't want to look at. I brought him up because I think he's the example sitting there, and he was the first one who did this years ago.
Okay, I was just curious. Yeah,
That's
I
one
had no intention of talking about Killer Seafood, but it keep coming up and coming up and coming up, and I'm like going, I mean, the guy's doing business, he's providing food, leave him alone. That's kind of the way I look at it, but that's just my opinion. You were talking about the barrier fencing. Now, the barrier fencing is required between commercial and residential?
Yes.
Okay, not commercial and commercial.
No.
And we're talking about zoning.
Yeah, we have the table right here. It's, tells you all our different residential low density, general, high density, tourist, public, recreation. It lists everything where you have to have it. And right now, every lot that has a food truck on it is commercial, and they all border residential.
That you're incorrect about. 36th Street, tourist commercial is 3 lots deep starting from 98. So they actually don't border against the residential. It's tourist commercial. And I believe the one behind that's tourist commercial.
The zoning map. After I looked at it, the one I had,
But if we, in the interest of time, could get some feedback on how we need to develop the regulation rather
You said
than
36,
piecemealing what's on the ground.
36, 98. That's what I'm trying to get to, the barrier fence. Are we talking about commercial to commercial, commercial to residential?
Right.
We're talking on any stinking lot just because somebody's in the mood? I don't know.
I think we're just getting general, I'm just getting general direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to clarify that.
All right, thanks.
And on the, no. You talk about setting hours of operations. I think you're in a sticky little mess there. Your attorney can advise you better than that. But if I'm a general contractor and I can build a house from 6 a.m. in the morning till 10 p.m. at night under the noise ordinance in Mexico Beach, I don't see how you can restrict their hours any more than that. I think you're opening up a can of worms you don't want to open up. I mean, most of them are closed by 7, 8 o'clock anyway. That's just something she said that concerned me about. And I understand a lot of this is about everybody wants stuff and not by me. You know, I have the pleasure of looking at whatever that rental plate is. Barefoot Rentals, used to look at bird dogs. Yeah, I'd probably prefer not to look at that too. But it's just the way the city's set up, and I think we just have to be understanding of that. And if we want food, I mean, what do? We run all the food trucks off. Where are we going to eat? That limits our options. And I just think that's something that we've got to be careful on how it is, what we require. We're going to require designated parking areas, whatever. Yeah, parking's going to be a problem. You heard a lot of things in the last city council meeting. They were talking about day deadlines, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. None of that applies to this. That applies to a temporary food trailer at an existing licensed commercial restaurant. There's no restrictions of that type here. It has no application whatsoever. But anyway, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
thank you.
All right, so do we want to formalize or, come on up.
Hi. Eric Fasagi, Kendra Davis Boulevard. I have a question for the board here. Do you feel you've been given all the information? Do you feel you've been given complete information in a charter to start looking at the food trucks? You mentioned that this is a fact-finding session tonight, but do you feel like you know exactly what you're being asked to do by the city council?
I think I know what I'm being asked to do, but I don't understand that there have been any complaints whatsoever.
Okay, so where I'm going with this is, I know we've talked tonight about all of the existing food trucks and the existing owners and the existing locations. But one of the things I took out of the last city council meeting, is there's a lot of uncertainty at the city council level as to exactly where all of these food trucks are gonna go. There was a motion for the city to purchase some property and turn it into city property and do a variety of things with it, but one of them is to put a food truck. There was discussion about putting food trucks at Park Park. There are some strong opinions on on both sides, positive and negative. So I guess I'll ask my question again. Do you feel that you, as this team, can address the food truck issue tonight and as well as in future sessions, while still having that certain level of uncertainty from the city council as to where exactly the food trucks are going to go at some point in the future?
It would be nice to know those answers, but I'm gonna go back to that meeting you're talking about. In that same meeting, there was discussion, I believe it was that meeting, there was discussion about the city purchasing some land. But it was also said we don't need to get into real estate. So we can't purchase land, and I don't think we need to put it at a park where we have the farmer's market. And then, again, and I like Michael and Killer Seafood, and I like the taco trucks and Point Break Pizza. But are you gonna make those guys haul those trucks in and out of there every single day? I mean, that's a lot of wear and tear on that park. As far as, in my mind, just moving those heavy trucks and trailers in there 2 times a day, that's a lot.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So this discussion, I'm sure you guys will continue it with respect to all the businesses and the locations that currently exist today. I know there's a couple more in the pipeline. They're going to get added to this conversation here shortly. I guess I'd encourage you to go back to the city council and say, we need more information, or we need more guidance as to what is inbound for food truck locations, what is out of bounds for food truck locations. Because when it comes to the idea of a current food truck on a residential lot next to commercial, and there's a variance, or there's the requirement to put up a shield, well, that's not going to be something you got to worry about if you stick them on a piece of city property. So are we talking about two sets of rules? I don't know. You I think need to ask that question back to the city council. Basically asking them for the constraints inside of which you can sit down and make your decisions. And I think it starts with a determination of what real estate is going to have a food truck, what real estate is not going to have a food truck when it comes to city property here, or commercial mixed, residential, all that. I think I'm uncertain as a citizen where you should be going. So I would suggest if you have those questions, ask them upstairs.
I can maybe clarify a couple things
Okay.
that were mentioned. The city does regulate where they can go. They can only go where restaurants and open air cafes can locate, or in locations, zoning districts that allow neighborhood and commercial scale activities. So that's where they can go. They can go on city-owned property with city approval. So the city council would have to approve the location if it were on city-owned property.
I think we could share some opinions, but your two-part, your question had two parts to a timeline. We can share some information tonight, but I don't have enough information on what the city has turned over to us to give you anything to go report back to them. Here are our findings and our recommendations based on situations, since we really don't know what that is.
So, let's, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You go first.
So I'm in agreement with you. I think if there are attendees here that attended that city council meeting, it was, I think, first discussed about having a separate committee to talk about food trucks. But then, if my recollection is correct, Tim mentioned you have a committee. It's the planning board. So I don't know that there's a whole lot of direction either, and I don't know if that's something Jack could come talk to the city council about to get more direction.
Yeah,
But
and I'm happy to do that. I didn't think that attending that meeting was a prerequisite for
No,
being a
I
part
don't.
of tonight's discussion.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. But yes, it would help me to have more direction as I'm preparing to write the revisions, so I know.
And some of the things make sense. We have a place to sanitize your hands, and one has it and one doesn't. And I'd like to have that, but I'm not prepared to say you also need a fence and hours.
Couple of things. If the board, and you want to go back, and I think that meeting may have gone 3.5 hours or so.
Yeah.
If you want to go back and watch that.
I did.
There were lots of different opinions from the 5 different council members there. I don't know, and I could be wrong, I'm sure someone will correct me if I am, that there was a consensus from that group other than let's pass it to the Planning and Zoning Committee and let them begin the discussion about it. At some point, there were some very ambitious guidelines thrown out with them where they were wanting us to meet maybe 3 or 4 times before the first meeting in May about this. But I don't think any of that came to us about that. But there wasn't anything other than we want them to look at it. Sure, individual members had comments about food trucks, but
It sounds like we need a summary.
That's why I made the list that is included in your packet. There's 7 items there that the council touched on as potential topics for the planning and zoning board, but there was really no direction.
Okay.
And, I mean, speaking from working in City Hall every day, we never received any complaints about the food trucks until the one moved to North 27th Street.
Yeah.
That was when, the complaints started. And so whenever you see the city council, there's not unified direction from the city council because, as Lee was saying, I mean, it's just, the council's not unified. It's, we're hearing these problems, let's pass it to the planning and zoning board and have them address it and then, make recommendations back to us.
It's gonna kind of be a moot point if the city council decides we're gonna put them at Parker Park for Laura to rewrite all of the rules for 22nd Street if we're gonna make Parker Park where the food trucks have to be. The buffer's gonna be not an existing problem.
Yeah, but I mean, there's no guarantee that it's gonna be moved to Parker Park. I mean, there's mixed opinions on the city council about that as well.
Yeah.
I watched it. I came.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I went to all these places to talk to the people, because I wanted to ask them what kind of problems they were running into. And pretty much it all came back to the same thing. Somebody complaining how it looks or the parking. Those were the 2 things right there.
But I didn't know about any of these complaints, but you're saying that the only complaints that you're aware of are about one of them, the 27th Street, and the city has not received, that you're aware of, any other complaints.
Correct.
So,
Are you aware of any?
Just on 27th Street.
So I had at least 3, but less than 5. I don't remember if it really was 4. And citizens talked to me about this in the last 3 days.
okay.
One of them said almost exactly what Tim said, was like, if there's an issue, let's address the issue, but let's don't create solutions for issues that don't exist. exist yet. That was almost verbatim from one of the individuals. The other two individuals that I do remember exactly what they said were talking about parking and how they thought that those cones that the council asked the sheriff's department to put up were just hideous out there. That was one of their words. I mean, didn't know if it was a construction zone or a crime scene or what with that. And if we're gonna regulate, this is not me, this is these people, if we're gonna regulate where parking on the right of way right there in front of those businesses, we need to be equitable about that with every business in 98, on 98, or with every business with parking with that. Not singling out the ones on 27th Street or Bad Mama Jamma. They are not singling those out, but be consistent with them and any other business. Those were the comments that came to me.
Chris, have you looked into, I mean, the parking thing? Because that's, like I said, when I went to all these places and talked to them, that was the issue, was the parking and people, just how things look. But the biggest issue everybody had was the parking.
So when you said you talked to businesses and
I went to every one of them, yeah, talked to the people.
and when you say how things looked, what do you mean by that?
Because I've had a couple of people, like you said, about, just to me, about how many things are allowed to be on here. We got one with 5 and this and that, and.
So that wasn't from the businesses, this is from other people.
On 27th, I guess they had complaints, and he mentioned the businesses.
He's passive on
Yeah,
complaints.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, 27th again. All right.
One last thing about that with parking. The individual also said that they look at what the council just did recently about whatever was gonna happen in, next to Mango Marley's with that parking, and they were gonna potentially allow, just ignore, not ignore, whatever the correct word is about, there's not gonna be adequate parking for that, and the council's aware of that, but move forward, so why are we singling out the food truck for parking?
Yeah, there was an issue for Mango Marley's parking in 2007.
Correct.
At the meeting, so.
It's like when 2 Collins was there, the same thing, nowhere to park. I mean, it seems like the biggest thing that I see was 27th Street, and I can see that, but anybody who goes down 27th Street, it's dead end, you're not turning around, and you're gonna go up somebody's driveway, quite a ways just to back up and turn. Like I said, I had to make a 3-point turn in a golf cart on that road, so that's the biggest thing.
Is 27th Street the one that the lot is also for sale?
Yes.
Yeah.
Outside?
Yeah, I mean, those people are used to living on the street in houses, and at the end of the street was a 2-story condo. You know, now they're looking at a bunch of trucks sitting there, and everybody coming down the street in their driveways turning around. And that's the biggest headache right now.
But Julie had a good point. I mean, we've argued that we don't want residential on commercial lots. That's a problem that we'd love to be able to correct, and now there's commercial on a commercial lot. We would rather have residential back, so.
Well, I think the thing with
That's
the commercial
not my
is,
backyard,
Yeah.
but it's gonna be in somebody's where, I mean, because of where commercial property is, it's
Yeah.
going to be in somebody's backyard.
So I don't think we have a list of recommendations for tonight to pass on to the city.
Okay, I'll stand by.
Okay.
I mean, the only thing is, like I said.
And I'll research it more and talk with the city and watch the meeting, try to get a better understanding of, is this limited to 27th Street? And where do we go from here?
And do they want to limit it to what's in here and about putting up a buffer zone? I mean, that's in here in black and white, and it says in here, even if there's a street between it, it's supposed to have something. So I mean, when you look at everything, it's never been there.
Something that might be related to this, and I'll ask you, Chris, do you know St. Joe Company's current timeline for building commercial?
They don't have it. They said, and this is, we talked about this with them at the meeting you weren't at. When they put their plans in, we all were under the impression that their commercial was going to be like down here in Windmark. They were going to build something, and businesses were going to come in. No, they ain't building anything. They want somebody to come in and build, and that's what the killer part was with that. They're right now, they are not doing anything. They're waiting for somebody to come in and say, hey, I want to put this in and put that in and build it.
That's your understanding?
Maybe on the residential side. On the commercial side, I mean, I've had conversations with them. There's no timeline right now for them to put in any commercial. They're waiting for more homes to be built so that you have people living there who can support those businesses. So, but I was talking to somebody today, they thought that commercial might start in the third phase, which right now they're clearing out that plan for the
Yeah,
second phase.
it's moving along, it's moving quickly.
Yeah. Huh? Oh, okay. But yeah, so it's a 100, the second phase is 154 residential homes. So obviously they get those built and people living in there, then, you know, they'll be one step closer. But now, there is some property that has, you know, 10 commercial units planned that's wanting to annex into the city. If you guys want to contact the city council and support the annexation.
All right, I think that's another topic. All right, well, I think that's about the extent of tonight's discovery on it.
Okay.
Be happy to talk with the city council and learn more. All right, there being no further business, I believe we'll adjourn this meeting.
Make a motion to adjourn.
That was fun. Thank you.